Your destiny is preserved in the amber glow of the choices you make today, waiting to be revealed in time. Explore the powerful narratives of fate and the lessons that define who we are destined to become. Click subscribe now and start building your own eternal legacy with us.
My daughter moved me into a memory care facility on a Tuesday. Not because my memory was failing, because my bakery sits on a corner lot in downtown Millfield, Ohio, and a developer had offered her $2.4 million for it. I know this because I heard her say the number out loud. She was standing in my kitchen, the one I tiled myself in 1987, talking to her husband in that low voice people use when they think an old man isn't paying attention. I was sitting 12 feet away at my own table, drinking my own coffee, very much paying attention. I had built Kowalski's bakery from nothing. I came to this country from Krakow in 1979 with $40, a suitcase, and a recipe for rye bread my mother wrote on the back of a bus ticket. I washed dishes for 3 years in Cleveland. Then I moved to Millfield because rent was cheap and the town had no bakery. I opened my shop in a space that used to be a hardware store. The floors still smelled like motor oil for the first 2 years, and I thought that was funny. My customers thought it was funny too. 43 years I ran that bakery. I knew every customer by name. I knew which ones wanted their rolls soft, and which ones wanted them nearly burnt. I knew who was diabetic and still sneaking a cinnamon twist on Fridays. I knew the whole town, and the whole town knew me. My wife, Carol, she passed 8 years ago. Cancer. After that, it was just me and my daughter, Renata, and I told myself that was enough. She would visit on Sundays. We would have dinner. She would ask if I was sleeping okay, if I was eating enough, and I would say yes, because I was. I was fine. I was more than fine. I was still going into the bakery at 4 in the morning, still making the dough by hand even though my baker Marcus had been with me for 15 years and could have done it himself. I went because I wanted to, because that flour on my hands was the feeling of my whole life. Then Renata married Derek 2 years ago. I want to be fair. I tried to like Derek. He wore expensive shoes and talked about investment strategies at the dinner table and never asked me a single question about my life. But I tried. Renata seemed happy, and that mattered to me more than Derek's shoes. But I noticed things. Small things at first. Derek started asking questions about the bakery. Casual questions, he thought. What was the lease situation? Did I own the building outright? Had I ever thought about what I would do with it eventually? I told him I owned the building outright. I told him I hadn't thought much about eventually. He smiled and said something about how I'd worked so hard. I deserved to enjoy my retirement. I was 68 years old and I ran a successful bakery. I did not feel like I needed retirement. Explained to me. Then the Sunday dinners started changing. Renata would talk about how tired I looked. She mentioned twice that a customer had called her worried about me, because I had seemed confused one morning. I didn't know which customer. I didn't remember being confused. I asked her to tell me the person's name, and she said she didn't want to put anyone in an awkward position. Derek nodded along very seriously. Then a man named Gerald Voss started coming into the bakery. He came in 3 times in 2 weeks. Ordered coffee. Sat by the window. Looked at the building like he was measuring it with his eyes. On his 3rd visit, I sat down across from him and asked him directly what he was doing. He told me he was a real estate consultant. He told me he represented a development group. He told me they were very interested in this location. I told him the bakery was not for sale. He smiled and left a business card anyway. I found out later that Renata had given him her phone number. I should tell you about the document, because that is where things stopped being subtle. One Sunday in March, Renata brought a folder to dinner. She set it on the table next to the breadbasket like it was nothing. Derek poured wine. Renata said she had been talking to a lawyer, a family friend. She said, though I had never met this person and that they had put together some paperwork that would protect my assets in case anything happened to me. She said, it was just a precaution. She slid the folder toward me. Inside was a financial power of attorney that would give Renata full control of my accounts, my property, and my business decisions. There was also something called a healthcare proxy that named Derek as my secondary decision maker. I read it slowly. I am not a lawyer, but I spent 43 years signing leases and supplier contracts, and I know what a document that takes things away from you looks like. I asked who the lawyer was. She gave me a name I didn't recognize. I asked if I could have my own lawyer look at it first. Renata's face did something I had never seen it do before. It went very still. Derek cleared his throat and said that seemed unnecessary, that this was just a family matter. I said that papers with my name on them were my matter. I took the folder home. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the house I had owned for 31 years, and I thought about the business card from Gerald Voss sitting in my kitchen drawer. I thought about the customer who had allegedly called my daughter to report my confusion. I thought about Derek's shoes, which probably cost more than my first month's rent in this country. I called my lawyer the next morning. His name is Frank Dreyer, and I have worked with him since 1994. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about Frank. When I finished, he said, "Give me a few days." But I didn't have a few days, as it turned out. 3 weeks later, Renata called me on a Wednesday evening and asked me to come to dinner on Friday. She said Derek had made a reservation at a nice restaurant downtown, and she wanted us all to have a good conversation. That sounded wrong to me, Renata. And I did not have conversations at nice restaurants. We had conversations at my kitchen table, but I said I would come. The restaurant had white tablecloths. Derek arrived with a man I didn't know, a man he introduced as Dr. Ellison, a geriatric specialist. I looked at that man, and then I looked at my daughter, and something cold moved through my chest. Renata was not looking at me. She was looking at the menu. Dr. Ellison had a clipboard. He said he understood I had been experiencing some difficulties and that he had reviewed notes from my primary care physician. I do not know what notes he reviewed, because my primary care physician has told me every year for the past decade that I am in excellent health for my age. But Dr. Ellison nodded very professionally and said he thought a structured environment would give me peace of mind and allow me to, as he said, step back from the stresses of daily management. I asked who had contacted him. Renata said my name in the tone people use when they want you to lower your voice. I said I was not raising my voice. I said I was asking a question. Who had contacted this man? Derek said that the family was concerned. He said it as if he were the family. He had known me for 2 years. He ate the bread from my bakery, without ever once asking how it was made. I went home that night and called Frank again. Frank told me what he had found. He told me that Renata had already been in contact with 2 assisted living facilities and had toured one of them. He told me that Gerald Voss's development group had submitted a letter of intent on the bakery building. He told me the letter was dated 3 weeks earlier, which meant it had been submitted before that dinner where Renata first showed me the power of attorney papers. I sat down on my kitchen floor. Not because my legs gave out, because sometimes you need to sit on the floor to understand exactly where you are. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would say. She had a way of being quiet and clear at the same time. Carol did. She would have said, "Stanislaw, stop feeling sorry for yourself and figure out what you still have." So I figured out what I still had. I had the building, free and clear. I had the bakery, which I had incorporated as Kowalski's LLC, with me as the sole member. I had a business checking account, a savings account, and an investment account that Renata did not know the full balance of, because I am a private person. I had Frank, and I had done something 18 months earlier, very quietly, that nobody in my family knew about. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus Webb had been my head baker for 15 years. He had started as a dishwasher when he was 22 years old. He had a gift for bread that I recognized immediately. I taught him everything I knew, including my mother's rye bread recipe, which I had never written down for anyone except Marcus. I wrote it out for him on a piece of paper and watched him memorize it, and then I burned the paper because that is what you do with something precious. 2 years before any of this happened, before Derek, before Gerald Voss, before any doctor with a clipboard, I had sat down with Frank and transferred a 30% ownership stake in Kowalski's LLC to Marcus Webb. Not because I was worried about my health, because Marcus had earned it. And because I believe in putting things where they belong while you can still do it yourself. Marcus did not know what that decision would end up meaning. I also want to tell you about something else I did. Something I did in the weeks after that restaurant dinner when I understood what was coming. I went to see Gerald Voss. I walked into his office on a Monday morning without an appointment. His assistant looked at me the way people sometimes look at a 68-year-old man who walks into a room without an invitation. I told her I owned the property her employer wanted to buy and I would like 5 minutes. She gave me 10. I sat across from Gerald Voss and I told him I was aware of the letter of intent. He looked surprised for about 1 second and then he looked careful. I told him I was also aware that my daughter had been in communication with him without my knowledge or authorization. He said he had been under the impression that the family was aligned on the potential sale. I told him the family was not a party to this transaction. I was the party to this transaction. I was the only party to this transaction. Then I told him I would sell him the building for $2.6 million with one condition. He asked what the condition was. I told him the sale would be contingent on a leaseback agreement. Kowalski's Bakery would retain the right to operate from the ground floor commercial space for a minimum of 15 years at a fixed rate. The development could proceed on the upper floors and on any adjacent parcels, but my bakery would stay exactly where it was. Voss leaned back and looked at me for a long moment. Then he said that was not what his clients had in mind. They wanted the full ground floor for retail development. I told him I understood, and that the offer would remain open for 30 days, and that he should let me know. I stood up and left. Now I need to tell you about the Tuesday. Renata called me on a Sunday and asked me to come to dinner. I went. She made pot roast, which she knew I loved, and I thought that was a bad sign. Derek was very quiet. After dinner, Renata said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she was worried about me living alone. She said she and Derek had found a wonderful place in Westerville, a memory care facility, and they had put a deposit down. I put my fork down. She said it was not memory care exactly. She said it was more of an all-inclusive senior community, and that they had a lovely garden and activities, and she thought I would really come to enjoy it once I settled in. I asked her when she had planned to tell me about this. She said she was telling me now. I asked about the bakery. She said they would figure all of that out, that the important thing was that I was taken care of, that running a business at my age was too much stress. I sat there and I looked at my daughter, and I tried to find the little girl I had taught to make pierogi on Saturday mornings, and I couldn't find her anywhere in that room. Derek was looking at his phone under the table, which I could see perfectly well. I said I would think about it. I asked them to give me a few weeks. Renata said she had already paid the deposit, and the room would be held for 2 weeks. So it was 2 weeks then. I spent those 2 weeks doing everything Frank and I had prepared. I met with a financial advisor and restructured my investment accounts. I executed a document transferring the business management rights to Marcus, effective immediately, making him managing member of Kowalski's LLC. I opened a separate account at a different bank and moved a portion of my savings into it. I wrote a letter to Gerald Voss, accepting his development offer with my leaseback condition, and told him I needed a response within 10 days. On day 8, Voss called me. He said his clients had agreed to the leaseback. He said they wanted to move quickly. I told him I did as well. Frank drew up the sale agreement, and we executed it within 5 days. $2.6 million, with Kowalski's Bakery remaining exactly where it had been for 43 years, protected by a 15-year lease at below market rate. I moved into the Westerville facility on a Tuesday. I brought my own coffee maker. I brought a photograph of Carol and one of my mother's kitchen in Krakow. I brought a small amount of rye flour and a tin bread pan because the facility had a common kitchen, and I had already asked the activities director if I could use it on weekday mornings, and she had said yes immediately. I did not tell Renata about the sale. She found out 11 days after I moved in. She called me in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, and I could hear from the first word that she already knew. She said she had spoken with Frank. She said she didn't understand. She said, "How could I do something like that without talking to her?" I told her I had done it exactly the way she made decisions that affected me without talking to me first. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Derek was very upset. I told her Derek's feelings about my property were not something I had any interest in managing. She started to say something about the facility costs, about how the money from the bakery building was supposed to, and she stopped herself. But I had heard enough of the sentence. I asked her to finish it. She said she and Derek had made certain financial plans based on the assumption that the building sale proceeds would be available to cover my care costs and their expenses in helping manage my affairs. I want to tell you what it feels like to sit in a room with a photograph of your wife and hear your daughter describe your life's work as a line item in her household budget. I want to tell you, but I think you already know, because you are here listening, and that means you understand something about what it means to work your whole life for the people you love, and discover that the love did not travel in both directions the way you thought it did. I told Renata that the building sale proceeds were in accounts in my name. I told her that Marcus Webb was managing Kowalski's LLC and would continue to operate the bakery for at least 15 more years. I told her that I had met with an elder law attorney who had reviewed every document Renata and Derek's lawyer had prepared, and that he had found 3 instances of what he called undue influence, which he explained to me in terms I understood clearly. I told her that I was not pursuing legal action at this time. I told her that was a decision I had the right to revisit. She started to cry. I sat with that for a moment. She was still my daughter, and I had taught her to make pierogi, and there was a version of her I still loved. I told her she could call me when she was ready to have a different kind of conversation. Then I went downstairs to the common kitchen and I made bread. Let me tell you about the facility, because I want to be honest with you. It was not what I expected. The garden was genuinely nice. There was a man named Howard in the room down the hall who had opinions about baseball that I found both wrong and entertaining. There was a woman named Patricia who had run a dry cleaning business for 30 years and who sat next to me at breakfast every morning and drank her coffee exactly the same way I drink mine. In silence, looking out the window, Howard told me on my 3rd day that I looked like a man with a plan. I told him I had recently executed the plan. He said that was the best kind of man to be. I went back to the bakery on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after I moved into the facility. Marcus had the oven going when I arrived. He looked at me and he didn't say anything dramatic. He just handed me an apron and moved over to give me room at the workbench. I made the rye bread. My hands remembered everything. A few of the regular customers came in while I was there. Old Tom Baxter, who had been buying a half-dozen rolls every Saturday since 1991, came in and saw me behind the counter and stood in the doorway for a moment with his mouth open. Then he said, "Well, I thought they got rid of you." I told him they tried. He bought 2 loaves instead of 1. I want to tell you one more thing. Derek called me 6 weeks after everything settled. I almost didn't answer. I answered because I thought it might be Renata calling from his phone. It was Derek. He said he wanted to apologize. He used the word sincerely. He said things had gotten out of hand, and that had never been his intention. He said he hoped I could find it in my heart. I listened to all of it. Then I told him that I had come to this country with $40 and a recipe, that I had built something that outlasted my own health scares, and the death of my wife and the economic collapse of 2008 and a global pandemic, that I had done this without ever once making a plan that involved taking something from someone who trusted me. I told him I didn't need to find anything in my heart. I told him it was already there. I told him I forgave him the way you forgive a bad winter. Not with warmth, but with the understanding that it ends, and the ground underneath is still yours. I hung up and went downstairs to make coffee. The bakery is open 6 days a week. Marcus runs it and I go in when I want to, which is most Saturdays and some Tuesdays when I can't sleep. The bread is still made by hand. The floor no longer smells like motor oil, but on mornings when the rye is in the oven and the light comes through the front window the way it did in 1982, I think it might as well. I am still here. I built something and I kept it. That is the whole story. That is enough.